What's a job that was once respectable, but now a joke? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Manager at the local bank used to be a highly influential actor in the community as they had control over who would get loans for their businesses. Now they are basically just a retail employee. Answer. Came here to say this. Up until about 60-ish years ago, in pretty much every small town in America, the local bank manager was essentially the most powerful person in town. They controlled who got loans for their farms, businesses, homes, etc. Local governments had to go through them for bonds and financing for infrastructure projects. Crop failed, business hit a rough patch, river flooded and washed away your barn, some disease came through and eliminate half your cattle. Well, if you're friends with the local bank manager, you can get a low-interest loan to tide you over or adjust your payment schedule to help you out. Now everything's centralized and automated. FICO scores determines who can get a loan and what their interest rate is. Any real decision that matters goes through someone at HQ. Most banking is done online anyway. Who actually goes to their local branch anymore? Now the local bank manager is just whatever teller's been working there the longest. Story 2. The milkman used to be Americans' lifeline to a staple beverage, a uniformed symbol of suburbia and national prosperity. Now they are used almost exclusively as the butt of adultery jokes. Answer. One happened during my birth. As I was exiting my mom, my dad saw that I had a head full of jet black hair, like a comical amount of hair for a newborn. He looks at my mom and says, "Where did the black hair come from?" And my mom responds while in pain and pushing my 9-pound jerk out, "I don't know, the god-darn milkman?" I'm definitely not the milkman's kid as my dad, and I sound identical and look the same up until we were teenagers, but it made for a good joke. Story 3. Teaching. And not because it's any less important. They are treated like glorified babysitters, paid nominally, but also entrusted to watch and educate our children, even though we don't respect them nor support them. It's a wonder that anyone in this country is still teaching anywhere. Answer. There is another problem here. The kids don't respect the teachers and exploit the fact that they are basically untouchable. Kids are so much ruder now. When a teacher tries to punish them for doing something bad, they just refuse. Teacher says, "Stand in the corner?" "No, I'm just going to sit right here." "What are you going to do about it?" "You can't touch me." And the worst part, parents defending their kids. The teacher tells the parents about their behavior, and the parents respond with, "My little angel wouldn't do that. It must have been the other kids." There is a serious raising problem, ATM, and I fear for the coming generations. Story 4. Congress member. They're supposed to represent the people, not their own self-interests. They are literally supposed to serve our best interests. They keep getting rich while we keep getting poor. Republican or Democrat, you have to see it. Story 5. Retail. Believe it or not, it was once considered a respectable job. Adults would work full-time for years with the same company, be knowledgeable about what they sold, and make a wage that could support a family. Story 6. Educators. They are just glorified babysitters to most parents. No respect at all for everything they do. Story 7. Real estate agent. Before the internet, it made sense, but now it's just some useless prick you pay a fortune for making a listing on Zillow for your landlord. Answer. I don't know. I feel like that's partially just a symptom of everyone and their mom thinking that being a real estate agent is easy money, and the profession being oversaturated with a lot of idiots. The real estate agent I worked with was super knowledgeable and hands-on and made the process of buying a house seamless, about as seamless as that process can be anyway. And I really appreciated her expertise and was thankful to have it when dealing with such a massive amount of money. I know I sound like big real estate here, LOL, but I do think good real estate agents are super helpful to have if you're clueless about home buying. Story 8. Cashier at major grocery outlet. Used to pay so well that you couldn't just be hired on as one. You had to work your way up. Great union, great middle-class pay. Now it's just another throwaway job that pays just above minimum wage. Story 9. Postmen were once a highly respected part of society, delivering letters from friends and relatives, but today, all you get are bills. Story 10. Journalist. If you express your opinion, right or left, you're no longer a journalist, only a commentator with an opinion. Answer. This hurts. I spent my early years in local news and still have friends doing the good work of sitting and listening to your town council meetings so you know what's up with your taxes. One of them reported a story regarding a local politician speaking at an event. After having counted the attendance and noting the number of empty seats, The story stated the room was about 34 full. Several people objected to the woke reporting, saying that they were at the event and the room was full. They found the tone of the story to be too neutral. Come on, my guy. Support your impartial local journalist. They have nothing to gain by leaning one way or the other, and without them, you'd be completely in the dark. Story 11. Used to be a big deal to be a librarian. Now people think they just sit around shushing folks all day. Guess it's time for an upgrade to book influencer. Answer. As a librarian, yes. Pre-internet, we were the ultimate providers of information. But now people think we do nothing. It's crazy how many people ask me how it feels to get paid to read all day when I don't even have time to read. Libraries have become community centers, and we are expected to solve all the issues of the community, from tech and career help to homelessness. Yet the majority of people see us as the stereotype of the shushing elderly lady. And that's not even talking about the movement to frame us as child groomers or adult content pushers. Story 12. Not trying to funny. Dentist. They are a joke for how they banded together to really rip people off, worse than a used car salesman. Story 13. Public school K to 12 teachers. They get paid slightly better than fast food workers, but still have to buy their own school supplies. Answer. I think the really tough part is 80 of parents either don't realize they are assholes and or neglectful to their kids, or they plain don't care. Maybe I'm just getting older, but it feels like antisocial behaviors have become completely normal over the last 10 years or so, and the snowball effect took over during COVID. I can't imagine what a classroom looks like now compared to when I graduated in 2012. Story 14. Secretary women started doing the job, and weirdly it suddenly had less value and took fewer skills. Source. I'm an exec assistant. Story 15. Telemarketing was seen as a legitimate, respectable sales career. People worked in proper offices, built client lists, and could actually make a decent living selling products or services over the phone. Now, the term is almost synonymous with scams, spam calls, and robocallers. Most people hang up instantly or block the number. The rise of social media and targeted ads made cold calling feel outdated and intrusive. Story 16. Priest. Their vow of chastity was seen as virtuous. Now it's assumed that they secretly violation kids. Story 17. Retail. People admired my job. It was the best time I had working. Below the belt and then Le Chateau. But then everything changed. McDonald's, I had a friend who started in high school. Sure, we teased her, but it wasn't mean or cruel. By the time we graduated, she walked into a $25,000 Nora manager's job. We were all jealous. That was a great salary then. Sigh, this makes me feel so old. Lulz. Story 18. Influencer. Once it was about inspiring people, now it's mostly filming yourself pointing at words on a screen. Story 19. I used to get in fights with my father, a farmer, over his quiet disdain and subtle disrespect towards all sorts of jobs, including lawyers, doctors, police, judges, politicians, teachers, government employees, etc. As I've grown up, I'm gradually realizing how spot on his disdain for each of those professions is. Story 20. Journalist. Why is no one questioning the validity of statements coming out of the White House? Why are just a few and far between people talking about all the lies Trump says? What happened to integrity in journalism where you have to have sources and be factual? I watched a press conference where the press secretary just blatantly lied and no one called her on her lies? What the fudge is that all about journalists? What kind of fudge sellout are those people? Story 21. Air traffic control. Due to a decade of no salary negotiation and traffic increases, we are making less money now than we ever have, and working more aircraft than we ever have with mandatory overtime and work-life balances that destroy families. Story 22. Travel agent. In the 20th century, if you wanted to go on vacation, you went to visit a travel agency because they were the gatekeepers. They could book flights and hotel rooms. They had the insider information about many vacation destinations, package tours, etc. Today, I can book my own flights, my own hotels, etc. There's a travel agency in a nearby town, but I'm starting to suspect that it's just a front for money laundering at this time. They are almost never open when I pass by, and I've never seen anyone actually entering or leaving the office when they are open. Answer. How annoying it used to be to book a simple domestic flight. You either had to go to a specific airline's office, usually requiring a trip to the airport, or visit a travel agent who had the ability to book flights. They would never let you look at their screen and would book you not on the best flight for you, but on the flight that paid them the best commission. All the while, they seem annoyed to be bothered by having to just book a flight rather than a whole travel package. It was time for them to disappear. Story 23. Cobbler. They used to be an important business in every community. Now people just throw shoes into landfills and buy new ones. Cobblers have become just characters in fairy tales. Story 24. If I was teaching Journalism 101 today, my opening statement to the class would be, find the facts, research the facts, and report the facts without bias. If you feel it is necessary to add your opinion to the facts, please drop this class and change majors because you will never be a true journalist. Unfortunately, many of our current journalists have lost their way. What's really sad is that many of them were good journalists in the past. Now it appears they are just looking for a soundbite. This is the part that really upsets me. Story 25. Human resources. Only people named Sarah, Susan, and Rachel with an art degree get hired for that position. Story 26. Witch doctors, shamans, or any form of religious healers, before germ theory and before ether made thoracic surgery possible, and even thereafter, people had little to no real options or understanding of the disease, infection, etc. People took faith healing seriously. There's a reason hospitals tend to have religious names, because hospice care, faith healing, the last rites, etc. were bonded to folk medicine. Nowadays, trust fund hippies with crystals, tarot cards, essential oils made in China, and pseudoscience are the closest thing to witch doctors. Story 27. Travel agent. They went from being the gatekeepers of exotic vacations to being that person you feel slightly bad for when you book everything yourself on your phone while sitting on the toilet. Story 28. Web designer. There are a few people who really excel at it, and they aren't a joke, but 90.9 of the times when someone says they are a web designer, it just means they've used WordPress before. Story 29. Pretty much any job they pays $40, $60K a year. Make too much to qualify for assistance, but don't actually make enough to live comfortably. It's a vert, cruel, and unfunny joke. Story 30. Car salesmen. They don't really know anything in depth about the cars they're selling. I see no reason why manufacturers couldn't have small showrooms in major cities where people can view test drive cars and buy them direct. Story 31. Not only your country, I evade teaching with much difficulty. After years of misery, I found that being jobless was a better deal. I trained for other works. Now I earn triple my old salary for a job far more cool. I don't have to pay in June that I will be took back in September. Of that, I will be branded fraudster because school administration, silly negligence. Story 32. I can't believe I haven't seen police officer on this list. Maybe it was too long ago when the police were considered the good guys and their cars included the phrase, to serve and protect. Boy, did that attitude change. Story 33. Human resources, especially in the IT industry. The A, legal compliance, and B, benefits and compensation aspects of human resources can be handled entirely by software that already exists. Secondly, while people in HR may care about people, their job is to protect the company. If HR is doing their job, they do not have your interests in mind unless it directly and financially affects the company. More than anything, the biggest joke is how a vast majority of HR depths handle talent acquisition in IT. An overwhelming number of job postings from HR reps are copy-pasted from another similarly titled job posting on the internet, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual job. It's clear as day when HR reps do this, but it's best not to tell them since that will likely affect your chances of getting the gig. The initial interview you have with a HR rep is almost always the same. The joke comes down how to get past the intro HR interview in IT. 1. Hit every key buzzword possible and add technical jargon. You will be both honest and they'll think you're a wizard. 2. Be positive enough to make the HR rep feel special. 3. Talk with confidence and mention something you did in your home lab. 4. Get to the technical interview where you get to actually prove yourself as well as understand the personality fit and team fit for the people you'll be working with. Story 34. Might sound weird, but travel agent. This may be more in my imagination, but I'm thinking many decades past when traveling wasn't as much of a shoot grind as it now is. Far from it. They had specialized knowledge, inside skills, etc. It's amazing that any travel agents exist at all still. Story 35. Journalists. They were highly respected when I was young, and I even thought about becoming one. Now people don't trust them, and they are so openly opinionated that no matter which side they are on, half the population thinks they're biased. The situation is vastly different from when I was a kid. Story 36. Meat cutter butcher was once a highly respected, high-paying skilled trade. Now the job is simplified, not breaking down whole cows anymore, and it only pays a couple bucks more an hour than a cashier. Story 37. Musical artist? Everyone who has access to AI music makers is now an artist. It's so cheap, it's painful. Story 38. The person that went around the neighborhood waking people up in the morning. Knocker. Now it's some jerk across the street with a loud jerk. Camero. Story 39. Lawyer. They used to be the defenders of due process. These days, they either AI or should be legally bribing judges. Story 40. I used to work at a record label. Now anyone can produce their own music and put it out. It used to be everyone wanted to be signed by the major labels. Story 41. Pharmacists. They used to be on the same level as doctors and dentists, but now it's just some guy working at CVS or Walgreens. Story 42. Telephone operator. I used to press 0 and ask for a phone number and be connected. Then the phone company got smart and started charging to talk to an operator. Flips through the yellow pages. Story 43. Teaching. Being a teacher had a certain level of respectability, and now they aren't. I applaud anybody that gets up every day and wants to inspire children and impart knowledge to them so that they can navigate the world around them. Story 44. Texas history politics is definitely some of the most interesting from the very beginning. Starting with Stephen F. Austin's old 300 original land grants, to the Alamo Goliad, bigger massacre than the Alamo, to Sam Houston, to Ma and Pa Ferguson, look them up online, to LBJ, everybody in every TX cemetery voted in the 1960 presidential election. Rumor? Would be great to hear how current journalists would report on this. To the current fiasco we live under today, both state and local. Local news is on right now and the whining continues. Since the county judge didn't get her way the other day, she says Houston has a 200 motors deficit and will have to cut several services currently provided. One of the commissioners that she called out the other day responded, "Services will not be cut on my watch. Pull up a comfortable chair and get some popcorn and enjoy the show." Story 45. Wessama Arnduel. Being a cop, it's so complicated. I honestly don't know how a lot of parents are even explaining what's happening with ICE and police brutality incidents. I met a guy in college who really wanted to be a cop. Enormous red flag. But I just thought, why are you in college? Just go be a cop. If you even graduated high school, you'd already be set. You definitely don't need college to be a cop. Story 46. I'm going against the grain, but the goddamn garbage, man. Maybe more the company, Waste Management, raise my fees for less work. I will not tip my man for their profit. Story 47. Groom of the stool. This was a highly sought-after position in the Middle Ages in England. This position was a highly sought-after title, which afforded immediate access to the king, intimate knowledge of the king's person, and someone often privately confided in by king during sensitive moments. His actual official job was to wipe and clean the king whenever he shat. Story 48. You mean besides the job where you get to live in the U.S. White House? That's pretty much a joke at this point. Story 49. Positions in any branch of the national U.S. government or the executive branch of Texas government. Story 50. Cashier in supermarket. In the 60s, they were the elite of the proximity trade. Now it is the job you take when everything else fails. Story 51. Retail salespeople that used to be helpful and knew all about the products they sold. Now they are hard to find when you need help and are pretty much cashiers. There are some exceptions, such as Nordstrom's and high-end stores. Story 52. POTUS. While it did fluctuate from greatness to total shoot a few times over the last decade or so, currently landing on total shoot once again, I fear that the future will prove to be as it is now, with a total POS doing a total POS job. Story 53. Police. You've got to have something genuinely wrong with you to want to be a cop, and I'd rather be in a room with anyone else on earth. Story 54. Retail. Believe it or not, it was once considered a respectable job. Adults would work full-time for years with the same company, be knowledgeable about what they sold, and make a wage that could support a family. Answer, yep. Seeing photos from the 1,960s of rows of men in shirts and ties in the television department of a Kmart just blows my mind. Like he has a wife who stays at home, 2 kids, a car, a detached house, working a job that demanded he know everything about the product and how to answer customer questions, qualify them for a purchase, and guide them to a suitable product, including arranging for delivery. It's a small wonder. A television in 1957 cost nearly the same in absolute dollar amounts as a television today. Today, it's some kid who doesn't speak English making minimum wage, who doesn't even look up from his phone as you walk by, if there's even anyone around. Story 55. Mail carrier, in the U.S. at least. We had a good half century where delivering the mail was highly paid, highly respected, and a great job for people that didn't like the typical office job site routine. In 2024, the pay is subpar and moving towards outright poverty wages. The respect is still high but waning due to out-of-control junk mail and subpar carriers who don't get paid enough to care. The PO took all the new technology of the last 2 decades that could have made the job easier and more efficient and used it to micromanage carriers. Source: Am Mail Guy. Story 56. Wedding photographers. We went from being the preservers of authentic, awesome, joyful moments for the bride and groom to being content creators that manufacture those authentic moments for likes and bridefluencers. I assisted at a wedding this past fall where the bride and groom redid their first kiss 3 different times for the content creators. Seriously. Edit. Honestly, the whole darn wedding industry needs a good kick in the nards. Story 57. Astrologer. Royals used to consult with their astrologers to see what was written in the stars for them, and it was considered a genuine science. Story 58. Journalism. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about delivering the news in a timely manner and started being about getting clicks and being the first to report something, even if it might not have been true. Answer: as someone who has worked directly in journalism, this resonates a lot. I used to write for a regional paper, and I used to take shoot because my pretty decent articles would be given fudge, absurd, and childish headlines. People who knew me would see the headlines. They wouldn't read much beyond it. They'd assume the headline reflected my opinion and would fact-check me with things I said in the darn article. I remember once an editor added a headline that completely contradicted the thesis of the piece and made me look like a moron. One of the most frustrating points of my professional life, I actually started lying to people about what I did. I don't think it's necessarily the journalists at fault. Sometimes it is. Rather, people don't see everything behind the scenes and don't understand the current incentive structure of these businesses. Where I used to work, we'd have X number of assignments that would need to be completed. We had one quota for self-ideated pieces and another quota for priority editor-ideated pieces, but we couldn't communicate to readers like, hey, this one is a ME thing for something I thought was important. This thing is an editor thing that they thought would get clicks. Please don't judge me for their dumb fuck piece. I've never been more embarrassed by a job than I was journalism, and I've worked as a male babysitter before, specifically because of editors and management. Don't even get me started on the stupid guidelines we got from management. Story 59. Working for an airline used to be admirable job, classy. Now it's embarrassing as airlines treat people like cattle. Story 60. Technical maintenance. Industrial maintenance. Used to be respected for your knowledge and contribution to production numbers. Now, with corporate greed, you are the red-headed stepchild and costing them money. You don't need all those parts, but woe to you if a machine goes down and you have no part because they reduced your inventory by 34. Edit. Word correction. Answer. Lean ideology has some benefits, but like pretty much all things business-related, it got taken too far in the name of cost savings. You'd think that the hammering the supply chain took during the pandemic from what should have been minor disruptions due to JIT manufacturing would have taught them some lessons about having at least some built-in redundancy, but nobody, or at least nobody with the authority to do anything about it, seems to have listened. Story 61. The keeper of the royal stool used to be a very well-respected position. Edit. For those not in the know, yes, this is what you imagine it to be. There used to be someone whose job it was to wipe the royal arses, and it was a highly sought-after and well-respected position. Edit 2. Groom of the stool, not keeper. Thanks to Mouse here. Story 62. Was getting a vaccine recently and the nurse giving it to me said, I would never put anything like this in my body. I was really shocked. Even if you think that should you really be saying that to patients? Story 63. Truck driving. Truckers used to be called the knights of the road. Now they're a bunch of clowns. I'm a retired driver. It was a good profession when I started. Answer. The trucking industry sucks these days because the companies have unrealistic expectations of the drivers and laws designed to improve the safety of truck drivers, and everyone around them often run counter to these expectations. For example, big truck drivers are supposed to be limited to 100 km/h here in Australia and have limits on how long they can drive for before taking a mandated break, enforced via mandatory logbooks, along with cameras on major highways designed to track drivers between checkpoints to ensure that their average speed does not break the speed limits. There are also weigh stations which check to ensure that the trucks are not loaded past their regulated load limits. Truck companies, on the other hand, expect truck drivers to reach their destinations at a designated time with no regard for delays and will penalize the drivers if they arrive late, e.g., If you hit a traffic jam on the highway, then you could end up losing money on your delivery because you cannot make up that lost time by driving for longer or by speeding. Drivers are also often expected to falsify their logbooks and end up on substances like methamphetamines in order to stay awake and alert. Story 64. Not sure if this was just a ME thing, but I used to think HR had a purpose. I wasn't sure what it was, but now I get that they are not there for you but as nothing more as a liability shield for the company, and that they should not be trusted by employees under any circumstances. HR is like the police. They can and will lie directly to your face. They do not have your interest in mind, and the entire depth is staffed by people who have no skills in anything tangible. Answer. I got fired from a public sector HR job yesterday, and I'm starting to see that as a blessing. The arguments I've heard from behind closed doors, the people who have done heinous shoot and gotten a slap on the wrist at most, the endless half-truths they'll put out to the workers to justify horrible pay, am taking them shit-canning me as a sign for a career change. Story 65. Engineer. In some countries, it's a protected title, but they keep putting it on jobs that have nothing to do with engineering. Answer. They keep putting it on jobs that have nothing to do with engineering. Yeah, I saw jobs advertising janitorial engineer. Not even fudge kidding. And sales engineer is a pretty common title. Fudge nothing to do with engineering. Engineer. In some countries, it's a protected title, I mean. It still is in the US. That never changed. PE licensing is still a thing and is still required for many real engineering jobs. Even software engineers are typically not engineers. I went to engineering school for EE. Hell, I wouldn't even consider myself an engineer as my title is SWE. I still call myself a dev. Most SWEs I know can't even write good tech specs. Story 66. The profession of a town crier was once highly respected, but has largely become obsolete. Many of you will read this and ask if this is real or if it is a joke. It is indeed a real thing. Story 67. Butchers. I don't know if I'd describe them as a joke, but the social clout has dropped significantly. Answer. I think local butchers are still well respected by those who take their meat seriously. If you're buying your meat at Costco or Walmart, then yeah, you don't give a shoot about who is behind the counter or where they're sourcing their meat from, or they care they've taken to prepare it. But if you're someone who likes to shop at local butchers, prefers unconventional cuts, knows about dry aging, and so on, then you will always appreciate a knowledgeable, talented butcher. Story 68. CEO, business magnate. Believe it or not, the majority of us in the 90s thought the U.S. was a meritocracy, and those people got there by being smart. Turns out it's just nepotism and connections with a smattering of generational wealth. Answer. Social media really helped people realize that one. I think it also lined up with that continuing to get worse. You used to have more CEOs that worked their way up in their industry and such. It's why some of the companies that were well respected for decades have gone to shoot. They went from people who did the work to rich kids whose parent bought them an MBA. Story 69. The counseling profession is currently in limbo. Consumers do not realize the atrocity and horror of companies such as BetterHelp and Ellie Health and Grow Therapy, etc. These are not grounded in mental health at all, and soon AI will be an option. The best therapists are those that can form a connection with a client, using techniques that take years and extra training, much to therapists' dismay as it is. There is no quick fix, and a robot cannot help you. Answer, we're seeing it in social work too, which overlaps in the sense of clinical social workers. What used to distinguish clinical social workers from counselors, and at least in coursework still does, is the focus on systemic factors, person and environment approach, and the interaction of systems in a client's life, family, neighborhood, political environment. Social work has also always had a distinctive focus on anti-oppressive and anti-racist practice, and social workers have encouraged to also do macro work community development, policy lobbying, community organizing, and activism. But now all that extra coursework is starting to go to waste because the only jobs that pay the bills, and sometimes even the only jobs available, are private practice or contract therapy jobs where we don't have any room to look at system or community level solutions to mental health problems because they're not billable. We're locked into only individual psychotherapy, which depoliticizes social work practice when we know full well that individual therapy alone often blames clients and holds them responsible for conditions born of trauma, oppression, poverty, and exploitation, all of which our MSW prepares us to address, but fewer employers will allow us to do as government funding shrinks, wealthy donors fear what they feel is radicalism, and services are increasingly put in the hands of private equity. It's almost impossible, for example, these days to find a social work employer that will allow you to do violence prevention or community trauma work anymore. Story 70. Blacksmiths now. If I want my iron forged, I have to go to some faceless cookie-cutter corporation. How I do miss William. Story 71. Nursing. We went from heroes during COVID to expendable workers, working at a 30% loss of staff so they can offer 1 to 5 yearly raises. It's a total joke. There's no one with experience anymore. About 70% of nurses have been on the job less than 5 years and don't stay anywhere more than 2 years. Not to mention starting rates for new nurses in some areas is as low as $28 an hour for a degree and license. Pathetic. Story 72. I feel like nurses have taken a hit in the last few years. Growing up, I always saw nurses as respectable profession, but now I see a lot of people make fun of nurses because they see a lot of them on social media spouting completely anti-science BS, or they have become memes for being a mean girl profession. I mean, I do know a nurse who has told me a donut is a complex carb that is a good breakfast for a diabetic child. Tiawin. Answer. Growing up, I always saw nurses as a respectable profession. For the 3-4 decades immediately following World War II, nursing was one of the few educated professions that had mainstream acceptance in the U.S. as being something that a girl could do, along with teaching and secretarial work. So many intelligent, driven women were attracted to that field, including many who I think would rather have been doctors. In more recent decades, ambitious young American women have had options and more prestigious career paths. While there are still intelligent women who are genuinely drawn to the field for good reasons, I'm under the impression that some of the other women who are entering the profession more recently are doing so because they want a traditional girl job. Story 73. I think the real question is, what are professions that people respect? I think people don't have much respect for anything unless it serves their selfish desires. Story 74. I remember when I was a kid, you were seen as an ungrateful jerk if you didn't respect the police no matter what and at all times. Now it seems that everyone has a certain disdain and distrust of the police no matter your background. Answer. Odd that, isn't it? It's almost as though having the Supreme Court tell us repeatedly that the police have no responsibility to protect us as individuals, that really what they do is protect property, that egregious crimes they commit while on duty have blanket immunity, and that presented with a mandate to stop takedown us, unfairly their immediate response was to attack us and then quit en masse. And in the end, at least where I live, we ended up pretty much exactly where we started. Go figure. Story 75. One that literally had this happen overnight is male models. They were celebrity enough to make bank and be a celebrity, but not in the personal public eye enough to have people have major opinions about them. Then Zoolander was released. The entire profession was rocked to its core because of that movie. It became such a joke that advertisers and agencies were having their own version of the YouTube adpocalypse because Zoolander did such a successful job breaking the golden celebrity facade of the entire profession. Story 76. Grocery clerk. It actually was skilled labor, requiring the employee to manage the inventory, to keep the store from running out, and to keep everything in date. That requires true skill. With the invention of barcodes and the rise of personal computers in the 1990s, companies started tracking sales and developed algorithms to forecast future needs. Now you just need a whole bunch of people to stock and only 1 or 2 people to make sure the numbers that the computer has are accurate. Story 77. Teacher. I mean, it's not a complete joke, but the way people treat them, it makes it seem like it is. Answer. I feel like it is becoming a complete joke. My mother is a 5th grade math teacher, and she has a parent who demands his child gets to use a calculator on tests, and these are tests in which a calculator could answer every question. It's just division and multiplication. I don't even know how you maintain the enthusiasm for teaching in that situation. Story 78. Travel agent. You used to have to be cosmopolitan, erudite, and it would open you up connections to a larger network of folks around the world. If you were one of few travel agencies in your town, you were often connected to government officials as well as the local barons of industry. Now it's mostly just surfing the internet. Story 79. Catholic priest. There was a time where it was an honorable profession and they were admired for their devotion to the Lord. Then the whispers of wrongdoing became shouts, and they can no longer hide the fact that the Catholic Church was harboring monsters, plural, for decades. It's infuriating to think the people in charge instead of turning the priest in for intimacy assaulting minors, simply would move them to another parish. Imagine you find out your son was molested by a priest that they knew molested other boys and moved him into your parish and didn't tell anybody about it. I'd go full Hulk rage. I still find myself in church for Easter, Christmas, and the like, and on the back of the program, there's common prayers. They now wrap up the Mass with a prayer for young men, still only men, to hear the calling and join the priesthood. Their numbers are dwindling. More often than not, they need to import priests from India or faraway lands because no kid wants to grow up to be a priest. Who can blame them? Watch Spotlight if for no other reason than Michael Keaton, the American treasure. Story 80. I feel like business degrees used to be worth a lot more than they are now. People used to have to trade stocks and manually manage all their accounts, but now one person with a suite of programs can do the same job. In my area, business degrees are worth about the same as arts degrees. Neither is particularly valuable or speaks to a candidate's skills unless it is a position in that field, but business was the most popular degree at my university, so it's a very diluted pool of candidates. Story 81. In the 90s, software engineers were the shoot. Now we are the same as admin and project managers are gods. Couldn't code their way out of a wet bag, but darn them Gantt charts. Story 82. There was a crazy lady in my town that had a chiropractology practice. She was a chiropractor, but claimed to be able to cure anything from infertility to constipation. My dad went to her after a car accident to cure his neck pain. It did nothing, but mentioned to her he was having constipation issues. She ended up using this device she called an activator and massaged his lower back with some cream. Well, it worked because he was shoot like a broken sprinkler that night. Then his pee turned brown the next morning, and he had to go to the ER for kidney damage because he had somehow taken too much of a topical diuretic. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, her clinic has been gone for a decade, but I still don't trust chiropractors. Story 83. Journalism clickbait headlines like porridge and crumpets to be labeled as junk food. The real story is that it is only foods of that kind with added sugar will be labeled as such. The result is manufactured outrage of people thinking the government wants to stop them eating normal, healthy porridge and crumpets. Stuff like this used to be the preserve of the Express and Daily Mail. Now the BBC and other outlets are doing it too. Story 84. Hotel I worked at in NYC still has a freight elevator operator. The elevator has long been converted to normal push buttons, but the union requires an operator. So the guy sits there on a stool and pushes the button for you. And if he goes on break, you are not allowed to operate the elevator. Story 85. Local auto mechanic. It used to be that there were a couple reliable guys in town that you could trust to do the job correctly at a reasonable price. Now people are using the franchise locations or dealers, and with trepidation that they're going to be finding extra things to fix or perform unnecessary work. I'm fortunate to have a local guy I can trust, but that's becoming a rarity. Story 86. Investment banker. At one time, it used to be a highly respected job, but now it is just filled with young people who think they're going to be the next Warren Buffett. Story 87. Calculator. No, I do not mean the machine. It was a profession. It was an educated position in an era when most people couldn't read. Story 88. Journalism. Journalists are supposed to be truth seekers. They are supposed to dig and tell the public what they find. Nowadays, they are little more than a loud hand for the people who own them. Journalists who get into it for the sake of truth and justice end up dying or committing tragic end. Story 89. Doctors, in a way. They spend an insane amount of time in school only to come out and make a mediocre salary while being slaves to the pharma industry and health insurance industry, as well as slaves to profit-driven hospitals who make you work brutal hours. If it wasn't for the need and satisfaction of helping people, no one would do the job. Concierge-type medicine is where many doctors are moving to in order to get away from this. Story 90. Journalism. It used to be about uncovering the truth, but now it feels more like clickbait and drama. Story 91. Philosopher. It used to be that logic and reasoning worked in harmony with scientific discovery to apply the knowledge gained in meaningful ways that benefit everyone. Now, philosophers are unbearable cum-rags who smear pretty words at the wall to appear smart and provide no benefit to humanity whatsoever. Story 92. One day, social media influencer will make this list, or are they already here? Maybe never were highly respected. Story 93. President of the United States of America. People across the world used to highly respect our commander-in-chief regardless of political leanings, and now to everyone it is a complete joke. Story 94. One profession that was once highly respected but is now often the subject of jokes is the travel agent. Before the internet and online booking platforms, travel agents were essential for planning trips, booking flights, and securing accommodations. They were seen as knowledgeable experts who could navigate complex travel logistics and provide personalized service. However, with the rise of self-service travel websites like Expedia, Booking.com, and Airbnb, the profession has significantly declined in visibility and status. Today, many people perceive travel agents as outdated, and the idea of using one is sometimes joked about as unnecessary or old-fashioned. That said, travel agents still play a vital role for certain niche markets, like luxury travel or complex itineraries, but their widespread reputation has shifted. Story 95. Journalism was once a respected position, with journalists traveling to war zones and protests. Now they tweet all day and write clickbait articles. Yes, there are still good journalists out there, but I don't think they are the norm. Story 96. Pharmacists. The most easily accessible medical professional who has completed years of schooling and understands medication management, therapeutic optimization, and can recommend options for most diseases, who is now reduced to slave wages in understaffed work environments with customers yelling at them that their meds aren't ready. Story 97. On the whole, any political position. While there was certainly politicians with bad reputations in the past, and there are still some well-respected politicians today, most politicians are viewed negatively in the modern social media-led world. Story 98. Teaching. We still take our jobs seriously, but society wants to treat us like complete idiots, or worse, predators. Story 99. Newscaster. At some point, it went from telling the news to just chasing ratings. The networks, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, all of them are pretty much useless now. Story 100. I don't want to be that guy, but journalism, where most of them gave up integrity for the better good of whatever fits their politics, and worse, joined the internet wave of the more controversial the better for surviving. Story 101. The most respected man in the USA was once a newscaster. Now we have corporate news and podcasters like Rogan. Story 102. I'd say doctors and surgeons, but they've always been viewed with some degree of suspicion simply because their livelihood involves profiting from our natural fear of disability and passing. It's just that now you can easily see how they talk about patients behind their backs on sites like Reddit, and it's hard to not lose respect. Same for scientists. They've also always been viewed with suspicion simply because the average person doesn't really understand what they're up to with all those lights and chemicals. But now it's no secret how often scientific knowledge is twisted by governments and mega corporations. Of course, Reddit blames the citizens for rising anti-intellectualism, but a lot of it is on the intellectuals for being elitist fudge. Story 103. After reading the comments, what professions are actually left that are considered respectable? All the shoot that's being suggested tells me that everyone just disrespects everything and everyone. Feels kind of gross. Story 104. Realtor. Not sure what the point in hiring and paying them is anymore. Investment advisors, mutual funds, and ETFs are the way to go. No one can accurately pick individual stocks on the short term. Insurance sales. Maybe if it's cheap advice for auto, but that's about it. Story 105. Artists. You needed an artist to capture your liking back then if you wanted generations after you to know your face. Now they just get fired from low-paying jobs or forced to do the job of their fired coworker for bad pay. Story 106. Local TV news anchor. When I was a kid, they were universally known and watched, and in some cases, sort of the unofficial mayors of their towns. Now they have few viewers, and the whole idea of watching a newsreader plod through a newscast you cannot interact with or customize seems really antique. Story 107. Lawyers. A lot of our founding fathers were lawyers. Many congressmen were lawyers. Now people dislike them due to the amount of ambulance chasers and frivolous lawsuits. Story 108. Stockbroker. No need anymore, with most PPL trading online for themselves, and most broke firms have turned to managed accounts. Story 109. Presidency, Supreme Court justices, lawyers, no difference there. I actually don't know a respected figure now. Story 110. Politicians. I mean, through time, they have always been greedy assholes looking to make a buck, but at least some created positive change. Now most take money and do little, if anything, just screw over the pleb. Story 111. Teachers. Not that I think the profession is a joke, but they sure have been getting attacked a lot since 2017. Story 112. Being a chef. It's not like the movies. We do substances and get tattoos cause we are all broken. Noon more fudge up than a liferline cook chef. Story 113. News anchors were expected to be at the forefront of movements, someone who would keep politicians answerable. Now, most of them are considered paid actors reading a script with a totally biased agenda. Story 114, graphics designer. Used to be glamorous to come up with designs, create logos, and do print work. Now it's competing with a possible client's cousin who has a copy of Photoshop, fighting random internet strangers use your logo in their portfolio, or having to constantly defend your pricing because someone feels you should be doing it for free. Answer: we have designers on salary in-house. Even their throwaway gag photo edits are better than I could ever hope for. He's on 150K. Also, we hired an industrial graphics designer recently for around 200 for a 8-week engagement that we got to keep all the IP for. We use the excellent visual designs for an upcoming product. This guy was like no one I'd ever met before. He was just pulling really nice, sleek, awesome hardware designs out of thin air based on what we were telling him in a meeting. He came up with a bunch of choices within a really short time frame and then tweaked the one we chose very quickly. We've got the hardware in production already and it looks excellent. I've still got much respect for graphic designers. Story 115, plaintive. Don't think if it's the correct word in English. People, normally women who get paid for crying at a someone else burial. Ancient Egypt, European Gothic period, and a tradition at the end of 20th century in a few countries. Edit, professional mourner. Thanks everybody. Story 116. Bank managers were on the same tier as doctors and lawyers back in the day. Now they're sales team leaders pushing credit cards and cross-selling accounts to customers who don't need them. Answer: that's because it was one of the first high-status jobs to be automated away by computers. Back in the day, a bank manager was in charge of all the lending decisions for their branch. They decided who got a mortgage or a loan, and they had to be skilled at knowing their customers and assessing the credit worthiness of all of their regular customers. Then we discovered credit scoring, and it turned out that one department of guys with computers at head office could write an application form that would find your good customers more accurately than all the subjective, face-to-face work in branches. So the bank manager role turned into what it is now. Story 117. Definitely photographer. In the old days, if you wanted a picture taken, you went to a professional. In fact, an old picture of the downtown of my city has a giant sign for a photography business. Now every mom owns a DSLR and is advertising her services on Pinterest. The standard portrait now is a blown-out background with a Lightroom filter applied. Answer: agree so much. Many years back, I helped a friend out by photographing her wedding. A mutual friend of ours was all upset because she had not only a 300 with an 1855, but a photography business as well. It was so unfair that she didn't get to photograph the wedding, so we compromised and she helped me out. When we were setting up for the reception and I was setting up my 2 external flashes, and she just sat there and said, "I don't need an external flash as my camera has it built in." Story 118. Teaching isn't a complete joke yet, but it isn't what it was. There was a time when people respected teachers. They might be the only person in town with a degree. They made okay money and sometimes even got a rent-free residence to go with the school. They were respected and looked up to. Now degrees are much more commonplace, and many jobs pay better than teaching. Some people think teachers are underachievers. You have a degree in math or physics or chem, but you teach? Guess nobody wanted you. You must have been on the low end of the scale. Also, if you're making 100K or even 1000K or more, and some people do, it's hard not to look at someone earning 50K or even less and not think of them as a loser, especially if they also have a 100K study debt. I'm a teacher myself. I like teaching, especially kindy kids. Story 119. Bank teller used to be a foot in the door to the finance industry. Now it's basically 20-year-old credit card salesman. Story 120. People moved en masse to certain places for a chance to work on an assembly line. Now, for a lot of people, that kind of job is something you warn your kids about to make them study harder. Edit added a word. Answer: where I grew up, there was kind of just an acknowledgement that not all kids were going to college, and some of them were happy to graduate high school and move on to working at the local auto plant. A lot of these kids would take shop in high school, which was less build a spice rack and more replace this transmission. I think it was great our school made this path an acceptable option because not everyone wants to or even needs to do the university route, and those jobs at the plant were union and became pretty good lifetime careers. And then 2008 happened and the plant closed, and I don't know that a lot of those families have ever recovered. Story 121. A typist. In the 50s, if you could type, that was a real skill. and also a government worker in general, back when government work wasn't used as a synonym for horseshoes and hand grenades. Story 122. Consultant. Used to mean something, but MLMs hijacked it, and now it means working from my phone, creating my empire, and changing lives. Join my team Hun Boss, Babe Hustle, Rant, MOM. Story 123. News anchor. When I was a kid in the 80s, there were 3 channels. The nightly news was an important part of a family's routine, and the anchor was respected as someone Americans trusted to tell them what was going on. Now it's a bunch of people screaming. Edit. Thanks to everyone for the replies. I perhaps shouldn't have included the last sentence, since my point was not the quality of current national news programs, but that the profession itself used to carry quite a bit of national respect, and I don't think it does nearly as much anymore. Answer. I watched a documentary on Netflix called The 70s that talked about, well, the 70s. One of their primary sources was a collection of news clips. The clips were simply a normal-looking dude sitting in front of a wood-paneled wall, talking into a microphone at a desk. It was so simple, boring, and seemed honest. I wish it were still like that. I probably wouldn't feel like I'm being lied to like I do when I turn on NBC, Fox, etc. News shouldn't be entertainment. It should be news. Edit. Spelling. Story 124. On-air radio personality. Not a complete joke, but unless you're one of the syndicated giants, it's not nearly the job it once was. Answer. My wife's friend was an on-air radio personality. She was all over the place locally from 1998-2010. The vast majority of people aged 30-55 in my area know who she is. She got the boot after her station got bought out. Now she DJs weddings and has a ton of trouble making ends meet after a nasty divorce. It's a really weird situation. We go out to a bar with her, and everyone runs up and wants to meet her and take pics. Then on our drive home, my wife is asking if the DJ could stay in our guest room for a few weeks. The girl is smart, but reliably monetizing local celebrity status is much harder than you'd think. And it's not like she was making bank even when she was in radio. Story 125. Town crier used to be a respected official who was the source of news and information for all the townspeople. But try walking up and down the street, ringing a bell, and shouting out the news at the top of your lungs now, and see how much respect you get. Story 126. Milkman. It used to be a way to earn an honest living. Now he's only used to convey other person's mom's promiscuity. Story 127. Librarians. With most books being available for download, many libraries are cutting back, and librarians are losing their jobs. Story 128. IT support. They'll let just about anybody do that shoot nowadays. If you're lucky enough to actually have a great team, they'll probably quickly move on to something else in the field. Answer. Started off working honest line support for a company subcontracted to HP. Manpower. We weren't IT technicians. It was a call center. All your targets were based around your call length and volume. Everything was spoon-fed in the electronic knowledge base, and the rule was if it's not in the knowledge base, you don't fix it, escalate it. Worked with people who could barely switch their own PC on, let alone advise people in the NHS and prison service how to fix problems with theirs. Shocking. Manpower also paid a full-time wage of $13,300 per month, which is disgusting. Never work for them. Story 129. I'm a graphic designer, so I'm going to say graphic design. I constantly work behind the curtain in the graphic field, and it's rife with incompetence. The problem arises because most employers are not familiar with graphic programs, can't ask in-depth questions about experience, and hire people based on portfolio faith. Knowing Photoshop is great, but it doesn't necessarily qualify you to work in my position. Answer. I feel like I can throw a stone and hit someone who went to school as a graphic designer. It is frustrating because I am a middle-of-the-road designer with a decent amount of experience. I also have to check files I know are from designers that make way more than me, and they are almost always garbage and saved wrong. The print staff at my college was always grumpy. I now know why. Story 130. Airline pilots. It's not a complete joke, but those guys used to be like celebrities to people. Eat it. No, I didn't just watch Catch Me If You Can, but it is one of my favorite movies. However, I do have a passing interest in aviation due to my proximity to the right, Patterson Air Force Base. Story 131. A blacksmith, way back, I imagine it was the shoot to be the guy with making all the weapons. Nowadays, most people don't see the talent required and just see it as a weird hobby. Answer. A guy who went to my school forged a chainmail vest, but everyone took the piss a bit. I felt so bad for the guy, as that must have been really hard work. Just a couple of 100 years late to the party of when that was considered a valued trade. Edit, wow guys, I've never had so many replies. This is awesome. So firstly, I've learned that creating chainmail is a completely different skill set than I thought. Secondly, sadly, I don't know what this guy's up to. Now, this was a fair few years ago. We went to school together. In school, he had a great set of friends that, like me, all loved what he did. There was just a lot of assholes in my school who didn't appreciate anything that required a skill. Story 132, full-service gas station attendant. They would pump your gas, wash your windows, provide small talk, give directions. Then most of the country moved to self-service. Story 133, stockbroker advisor. Buying stocks, mutual funds, and other investment tools used to be fairly murky water. Research was difficult, and folks in the profession felt more like gatekeepers than professionals. But they were necessary because you couldn't just climb on the internet and buy an investment financial product. Story 134, philosophers. Once were people who would tackle questions about humanity, purposefulness, politics, and life. Today, Starbucks baristas. Story 135. Practically all professions. Accessible information for all has opened up many closed shop occupations and exposed a lot of smoke and mirrors. In addition, various crises in law, finance, and politics has shown that the people doing them aren't geniuses. They're just more privileged. Also, never had to scroll for so long to get to the bottom of a thread. So congratulations if you got to the end to read this. Story 136. Teachers. They shouldn't be a joke, but the way a certain portion of the U.S. treats them, you'd think they were. What teachers do might be the singular best investment a nation can make in its children. They're also expected to give moral guidance to children and essentially be babysitters at the same time. They pay money out of their own pockets, sometimes 4 digits worth, because of negligent parents or because their own enthusiasm outstrips what the district is willing to provide, and they can only claim a fraction of that on their taxes when it should be a dollar-for-dollar credit, I think. They're routinely thrown under the bus by administrators in order to placate self-righteous parents who are refused to show any respect for the teacher's judgment and refuse to be denied having their way. The teacher, who is objectively the best judge of a student's academic progress, cannot even hold a student back. When my wife was a teacher, she had children in 4th grade who could not read at a Twan grade level, but the parents refused to believe it, and the administrators refused to back up the teacher. So those students would move on to 5th grade, only to have any potential love of literature or education itself beaten out of them by a pervasive sense of incapability. And then you have assholes who say they're paid well, or even overpaid. Assholes who will move the goalposts and opine about construction workers and soldiers not being paid well either. Assholes who whine about how they don't have school-age children or never had children at all, but who will certainly complain when they're in a nursing home and they receive incompetent care from the young people they refuse to invest in the education of. Short-sighted, self-righteous, ignorant assholes. Answer: they're routinely thrown under the bus by administrators in order to placate self-righteous parents who are refused to show any respect for the teacher's judgment and refuse to be denied having their way. So much this. The last woman I dated was a teacher, and some of the stories she told me about the parents would have made me quit in a heartbeat. Something like half of new teachers quit within 3 years. It's so bad. Teachers are criminally underappreciated. Story 137. Ireland. Priests. Back when my mother was a child, priests were a force to be reckoned with. My mother's generation started to think, why are we worshiping these guys? Her brother, my uncle, was a priest as well. He was so smart and loved religion and wanted to work for God, but he left the priesthood in the 90s. All the scandals and the abuse came out, and now they are just a religious figure and not held with high respect and fear as they used to. Story 138. Being an armorer. No one needs armor anymore. Edit. Delta awarded to all those who mentioned law enforcement and military use of armorers. My mind has been changed. Kanji my view reference. Edit. And fencing and reenactments. And car manufacturers, maybe. Edit. And totally didn't think of the film industry. Basically, an armorer is still a thing, although changed considerably. Story 139. Not a joke, but pilots used to be like movie stars. Now they're more or less glorified bus drivers who need tons of training. Story 140. Flight attendant. We've gone from the glory days of Pan Am to the chain-smoking lunch moms of United American Delta. Story 141. Cashier. Used to be you could make a decent living as a cashier, When my grandfather was one, other cashiers would make fun of the guys who used abacuses and, God forbid, later calculators. A cashier had to be darn fast at math to be able to quickly calculate things like sales percentages and taxes. And it was faster getting out of the store too, since you never had to scan items. You just looked at what a person brought and you told them how much they owed you. He had to memorize the cost of everything in the store and keep up with changes in price. My grandfather also prided himself on never needing a piece of paper except to write the receipt. When I was super little, he used to challenge people to see who could find the answer to math problems, him or the calculator. People accepted because of the course the calculator was faster. But before you could finish typing it in, he knew the answer. Now, cashier means you mechanically move items across a scanner and you get paid peanuts for doing so. Cashier was never like on the level of doctor or anything. It was always for teenagers, but I don't know of a profession that has fallen harder from an impressive job particularly smart and mathematically oriented teenagers could do, to a line of sad people manning the food conveyor belt and barely making ends meet. Story 142. Teachers no longer get the respect they deserve. That said, the respect is a joke, not the position. Answer. There was a cartoon I saw a while back that went, 20 years ago, parents looking at child, explain these grades. Sure not now, parents looking at teacher. Explain these grades. Parents don't respect teachers. Students don't respect teachers, but teachers are scarcely allowed to punish students, but are somehow supposed to teach a class who doesn't want to be there. Story 143. Night's Watch. Taking up the black used to be for men of honor. Now it's full of thieves, rapers, and murderers. Answer. I think one of the subtexts of A Song of Fire and Ice is that concepts of honor and valor are illusory, and that most people simply act selfishly for power or survival. I suspect the Night's Watch had always been staffed with thieves, rapists, and murderers, but there has always been motivation to make the watch seem honorable to otherwise honorable people chosen to lead them. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.